aware that at any minute it's going to be submitted to its first survival test of the atomic age, New York City goes about business as usual. Times Square at the crossroads of the world, echoing to the hustle and bustle of everyday sounds. Then the sirens scream, and the wheels of the world's greatest city come to a halt as in stride the metropolis's millions go calmly to shelter areas. A brisk stock exchange session melts into shelters, and its hoarse shouts are muted. The school children are well trained and do themselves proud. And strange was the silence as the city stood still. At the all clear, the city reverts to normalcy, but not smugly. The thoughts of a real atom bombing has a sobering effect.
It was 1951, and the trauma of the A-bomb was still new enough to send a chill down the national spine, and no wonder. We mistrusted the Soviet Union, we fought the communists in Korea, and we wondered what World War III would mean if it came. Hello everybody, this is Lowell Thomas, remembering with you that cold year of 1951 when fear darkened the skies for so many of us. Disaster, when it came, was not from across the ocean, but from natural sources, and even a national sport.
The most disastrous flood in the nation's history buries industrial Kansas and Missouri under a sea of water, converting Kansas City's airport into a harbor more adapted to keels than wheels. From Topeka, the Kansan capital, to the twin Kansas cities, the Kansas or Kaw River has burst over and through its dikes. And on the banks of the rampaging Missouri River, fire brings its horror to the desolated region. The gateway to the south is closed by the wandering waters that spread from riverside tracks to immerse inland areas in fathoms of muddy risings. The windows of heaven were opened and unrelenting rains poured their torrents to the cresting flood. Chickens and domestic animals are abandoned in the hasty flights made necessary by the overwhelming waters. Upriver, at Manhattan, Kansas, the waters of the flood prevail throughout the city, the river rushing through the streets with cataract force. Rescues are numerous and heroic, but as this newsreel is released, the inundation has taken 33 lives, while property damage is set by Army engineers at the all-time high of $500 million.
At Langhorne Speedway in Pennsylvania, top pilots whirl on in the National Sportsman Stock Car races, and the scheduled 100-mile merry-go-round is everything it's cracked up to be. As a spectacular sports show, it's a smash hit. Yes, this is one business that does not thrive on a quick turnover. Man alive, and let's hope all the men are, just rashes of crashes. Gasoline spilled on the track, a hot car, and smoke and flames soon roar a fresh challenge to the plucky pilots. Daring drivers race on with throbbing throttles and pounding pulses, post-haste into pile-driving pile-ups. Unscheduled fireworks, booming, bumping in a maze of blaze. Scorching side swiping, a striking sensation, and soon to the wrecks come running the rescuers. These fellows will never get wealthy or healthy, but they do get a bang out of it. A torrid 10-car crack-up, ram, slam, bam, wham, yes ma'am. Many injured, but death is cheated. Wholesale wreckage halts the race after 83 laps. High voltage jolted.
Oh, there were less violent stories in the news. The Constitution was amended to prevent any American president from ever again running for a third term of office. A scandal was discovered in the Bureau of Internal Revenue, and there was good news for those who may have gotten older than last year. As the always young, always trying to be young, Bernard McFadden actually proved his youth once again.
Unable to get approval to parachute into the Niagara Falls Rapids, Bernard McFadden boards a plane at Teterboro Airport for a leap into the much calmer waters of the Hudson River between New York and New Jersey. At the required altitude, there's no hesitancy, and he jerks through the blue. Floating earthward, the 83-year-old physical kosherist barely misses a woods on the Jersey shore. But a kindly breeze favors the octogenarian at the last minute, and he dunks into his objective. Wearing only 2 suits of heavy, long underwear, he's an awkward baggage to rescue. Yet suffering nary a scratch, he says old age is just a bad habit. Maybe he's got something.
In 1951, remember how organized crime was exposed? A Senate investigating committee under Estes Kefauver of Tennessee found that crime operated under the direction of 2 major syndicates, one headed by Frank Costello and Joe Adonis. Kefauver's hearings were televised, keeping the country spellbound with the record-breaking immediacy of the coverage.
The hearing room in New York's federal court building is crowded when Virginia Hill Hauser, the fabulous sweetheart of the slain Bugsy Siegel, notorious underworld figure, answers her subpoena, unfolding in blandest manner revelations that set the nation wondering.
Did you ever get any money from any other person whom we might call a gangster other than Siegel?
No.
Did you ever get any money from Costello?
No.
And did you ever get any money from Myalansky?
I never got money from any of those fellas.
None of those fellas?
None of these that I've been reading about, and none that I knew. They never gave me anything.
None of the Fichettes?
No. I don't even speak to them. I mean, I met that Charlie once or twice. I don't even talk to him.
You don't like him?
No.
Do you still bet the horse race?
That's the only thing now? I don't bet anything. Now I'm afraid I'll win, and then they'll say I made more money than I did.
But when Frank Costello refused to allow his face to appear on the tiny television screen, the Movietone cameras managed to capture something a little more revealing.
Mr. Costello, did you hear the testimony of Mr. Francis McLaughlin yesterday?
No, the defense is...
Mr. Alley, all due respect to the son, which I put an awful lot of respect for, I'm not going to answer another question. You just says I'm not under arrest and I'm going to walk out.
Now, I should explain to you exactly what the legal situation is. You are under subpoena, and if, as I assume, the chairman instructs you to remain and answer questions, you will thereby become guilty of contempt of this Senate committee.
Just a minute, Mr. Wolf. Just a minute, Mr. Costello.
You don't mean that,
We'll use every resource in our command to see that he's brought to contempt and that he's arrested by the United States Senate. Action worthy of Gromyko. The alleged crime king dares the nation's highest elected body to do its worst.
On the international scene, shifts in power attracted attention. The Chinese Reds rolling over glorious out-of-this-world Tibet. And the Prime Minister of Pakistan was assassinated by a fanatic. And another assassination occurred in that most troublesome of troubled spots, the Middle East, and it touched off an international round of disturbances. The Premier of Iran, on his way to the mosque to a service, was gunned down by a mullah, a reader of the Quran, in 3 swift pistol shots. And hours after his funeral, a parliamentary committee voted to nationalize Iran's oil, to which the Premier had been so solidly opposed. And the great Winston Churchill once again became Prime Minister of England.
The Lord Mayor's banquet at London seats a capacity crowd to hear Winston Churchill make his first major speech since again taking the helm of the British ship of state. Leaving no doubt where Britain and the Commonwealth stand, he declaims,
"Still centering upon this island are woven by ever-growing ties of strength and comprehension, of common need and self-preservation. Come home to us all. We are bound by all these to the great republic across the Atlantic Ocean. The sacrifices and exertions which the United States are making to deter and, if possible, to prevent communist aggression from making further inroads upon the free world are the main foundation of peace.
Most explosive area in world affairs, Iran's nationalized oil fields. Long envied by the USSR, the nationalization of the rich fields has set off a bitter dispute between Iran and Britain, precipitating another delicate crisis in the all-too-troubled international scene. Nullifying a concession to the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company in which the British government has a 50% interest, Iran's action is considered a breach of contract by the English. 1/5 of the world's oil supply is involved. The whole effort of the United States to aid the free world depends on abundant oil. Trouble in Iran affects all our plans. For this reason, we are acting as arbiters in an effort to find grounds for amicable settlement. But the Kremlin is delighted by the dispute, and native communists are using it to stir up trouble. Struggle Day, as the Egyptians themselves call it, finds the streets of Cairo just about able to contain the million demonstrators turned out to protest Britain's continued occupation of Egyptian areas. It's a silent, orderly protest, and among the marchers is Prime Minister Mustafa Nashas Pasha. He sparked the current unrest by demanding that Britain surrender the Suez Canal. Though by treaty with Egypt, Britain is the waterway's legitimate operator. The banners blare anti-British sentiments and proclaim liberation or blood as the alternatives. In Along Bay on the coast of Indochina, the troop transport Pasteur brings 3,600 more soldiers to the fight against the communist-led Vietminh rebels. Insurgents who for 5 years have made this southern peninsula another scene of Kremlin-inspired aggression. The newcomers will be led by General de Tassigny, who only a month ago became supreme commander of this troubled area. French Moroccans, foreign legionnaires, Senegalese, they soon engaged the communists in a battle for a road between two key forts guarding Hanoi, the capital city. On a mission to bomb a communist stronghold, this French Air Force plane drops a load of firebombs, deadly incendiaries that spread havoc where they fall. A French armored train battling guerrillas has a narrow escape. The Vietminh Reds have abandoned organized warfare, reverting to hit-and-run tactics. But here a pocket of Kremlin dupes gets a machine gun scorching. After the punishing fire, the government troops break from the train for a roundup.
I remember commenting after a hurried trip to Europe that the people abroad were failing to display much feverish interest in communism. They disregarded the danger of war. They even didn't talk about the truce talks in Korea. There was certainly no shortage of such feverish interest in our own country, and such actions had their counterpart behind the Iron Curtain.
Where this jury of 11 men and 1 woman and Judge Kaufman have been hearing testimony for 16 days. Found guilty, Morton Sobel, the third defendant, leaves the court to await sentence. The couple, also found guilty, follow. As wartime betrayers of America's biggest secret to Russia, all 3 face death. Handcuffed to a common criminal, Alger Hiss leaves a U.S. Marshal's office in New York to serve a 5-year prison term. Convicted of lying when he denied giving government secrets to Whittaker Chambers, former communist courier, the ex-State Department advisor to President Roosevelt still protests his innocence. With the news of the freeing from jail of Yugoslavia's Archbishop Stepanec, Movietone News obtains the long-suppressed pictures of his prosecution 5 years ago at Belgrade. At this typical communist trial, with its sinister mockery of justice, the persecuted prelate is a dignified and undaunted figure, facing his prosecutors with the brave composure of a martyr, an inspiring contrast to the snarling servant of the Red Tyrants. These films were evidence against the Roman Catholic churchman, advanced as showing him collaborating with Nazis in Croatia. This collection of valuables is evidence purported to be loot from concentration camps found hidden at his episcopal residence. Even gold teeth were included with cigarette boxes and other valuables, in addition to bushels of silver coins. Though hounded and persecuted as a conditionally free man, the Archbishop defiantly rejects the Red Decree depriving him of his office.
But the contest took its most visible form on the Asian battlefront in Korea. UN forces under MacArthur had been fighting North Koreans and Communist Chinese since June 1950 in a tough so-called police action.
The threat of world conquest by Soviet Russia endangers our liberty and endangers the kind of world in which the free spirit of men can survive. Our own national security is deeply involved with that of the other free nations. While they need our support, we equally need theirs. Our national safety would be gravely prejudiced if the Soviet Union were to succeed in harnessing to its war machine the resources and the manpower of the free nations on the borders of its empire. It is in the Far East that we have taken up arms under the United Nations to preserve the principle of independence for free nations. We are fighting to keep the forces of communist aggression from making a slave state out of Korea.
The giant battleship Missouri, with all at battle stations, now prepares to bombard the North Korean east coast. Its huge 16-inch shells loaded to lay down a heavy barrage on unsuspecting communist shore installations and troop concentrations. The Big Mo is an angry avenger. From the ship's deck, the hits are plainly visible as Admiral Struble sees an airman explode a lurking mine.
After several months, the enemy forces agreed to discuss a truce and then began those interminable negotiations, but not before the year's most dramatic conflict of wills.
It was from this White House office in the small hours of the morning that President Truman made known his momentous decision that relieved General Douglas MacArthur of all his commands in the Far East. Action precipitated by this letter from General MacArthur to Republican House Leader Martin. A communication that disclosed the Supreme Commander deeply at variance with presidential policy and United Nations directives. Newsmen routed out of their beds by a White House summons reflected the urgency of the moment. And in flashing seconds, the sleeping country was stirring to the shocking impact of the presidential decision. In every community, newspaper extras were dramatic witnesses of the terrific import of the startling action. His greatest hour. On the deck of the battleship Missouri, General MacArthur received Japan's unconditional surrender, a victory that even in dismissal elicits from President Truman the statement, General MacArthur's place in history as one of our greatest commanders is fully established. In his post as Supreme Commander of Allied powers in the Far East, General MacArthur won new honors as ruler over Japan's 78 millions. And the start of the Korean War found him ready to serve his country and the United Nations as leader against communist aggression in the Far East. In this new post, which he assumed as a veteran of over 70, he knew bitter defeat and the glory of victory. Pushing from the little beachhead at Busan through a series of battles that resulted in this further triumph, the recapturing of Seoul, capital of the Republic of South Korea, and the restoration to his office of President Syngman Rhee. From here, his forces went on to drive the communists to the banks of the Yalu on the Manchurian border. In the flush of this transitory victory, President Truman flew to the little dot in the Pacific called Wake Island for a rendezvous with the Supreme Commander. At this date, differences of opinion were rumored, but the President decorated the soldier. Then came disaster in North Korea. The Chinese communists from what General MacArthur called the privileged sanctuary of Manchuria, launching their red hordes against the vastly outnumbered United Nations forces. But the Supreme Commander converted this defeat into a tactical victory. From the Yalu, his forces successfully fighting their way through the communist legions and retreating with only ground losses. But now the Supreme Commander got into political differences with the President, the State Department, and the United Nations on the subject of Formosa, and urged using these troops of Chiang Kai-shek's Nationalist Army against the Chinese Reds. His opponents were against this, and it is their opinion that there are better ways of persuading the Chinese Reds to withdraw from the Korean scene. In addition to the use of Chiang Kai-shek forces, General MacArthur was for taking up the gauntlet with Red China, for bombing its cities and blockading its ports, which he put on the record in his letter to Representative Martin.
What would suit the ambitions of the Kremlin better than for our military forces to be committed to a full-scale war with Red China? It may well be that in spite of our best efforts, the communists may spread the war. But it would be wrong, tragically wrong, for us to take the initiative in extending the war. I've thought long and hard about this question of extending the war in Asia. I've discussed it many times with the ablest military advisors in the country. I believe with all my heart that the course we are following is the best course. I believe that we must try to limit the war to Korea for these vital reasons: to make sure that the precious lives of our fighting men are not wasted, to see that the security of our country and the free world is not needlessly jeopardized, and to prevent a third world war. A number of events have made it evident that General MacArthur did not agree with that policy. I have therefore considered it essential to relieve General MacArthur so that there would be no doubt or confusion as to the real purpose and aim of our policy.
President Truman's action prompted Democratic support and Republican wrath. Even General Omar Bradley, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, accused MacArthur of trying to wage the wrong war at the wrong place at the wrong time with the wrong enemy. But MacArthur remained a national hero. And his speech before Congress when he came home, it was a dramatic explanation of his personal stand concerning the war in Korea and all we had been doing in Asia.
Coming to make a soldier's report of his position, the returning hero received an ovation in Congress, and to the long history of that elected body added a page that has seldom been equaled in drama and import.
I address you with neither rancor nor bitterness. In the fading twilight of life, with one purpose in mind: to serve my country. Apart from the military need, as I saw it, to neutralize the sanctuary protection given the enemy north of the Yalu, I felt that military necessity in the conduct of the war made necessary, first, the intensification of our economic blockade against China. 2, the imposition of a naval blockade against the China coast. 3, removal of restrictions on air reconnaissance of China's coastal areas and of Manchuria. 4, removal of restrictions on the forces of the Republic of China on Formosa with logistical support to contribute to their effective operations against the common enemy. For entertaining these views, all professionally designed to support our forces committed to Korea and bring hostilities to an end with the least possible delay and at a saving of countless American and Allied lives, I have been severely criticized in lay circles, principally abroad, despite my understanding that from a military standpoint, the above views have been fully shared in past by practically every military leader concerned with the Korean campaign, including our own Joint Chiefs of Staff. An old soldier
who tried to do his duty as God gave him the light to see that duty. Goodbye.
After his address, the homecoming general was hailed by the populace as he proceeded through the Capitol streets to Washington Monument for the civic celebration in his honor. A hero home from the wars, assured forever a grateful place in the hearts of his countrymen.
And so the conflict went on and on between the military authorities and our civilian officials. General Matthew Ridgway replaced MacArthur as Supreme Commander in the Far East. The peace talks continued with the Communists. They were to drag on for 2 years, interrupted by intermittent fighting until finally the UN forces terminated the conflict. As for General MacArthur, he was still a national hero, in spite of any antagonism that remained from that incident of long ago in 1932, when he had been called upon to do something about the bonus army in Washington. And he was also to get the support of a great many people for the Republican nomination for the presidency, and to retain the respect that was due to a man of his colossal military achievement. Presidential candidate Eisenhower in 1952 was going to propose that he would go to Korea personally to put an end to the undeclared war. But this was 1951, and the Cold War went on and on. And this is Lowell Thomas, remembering that year with you and saying, so long until tomorrow.
Did you ever get any money from any other person whom we might call a gangster other than Siegel?
No.
Did you ever get any money from Costello?
No.
And did you ever get any money from Meyer Lansky?
I never got money from any of those fellas.
None of those fellas?
None of these that I've been reading about, and none that I knew. They never gave me anything.
None of the Shetties?
No. I don't even speak to it. I mean, I met that Charlie once or twice. I don't even talk to him.
You don't like him?
No.
Mr. Costello, did you hear the testimony of Mr. Francis McLaughlin yesterday?
No, the defense is...
Mr. Halley, all due respect to the Senate, which I have an awful lot of respect for, I'm not going to answer another question. You just says I'm not under arrest and I'm going to walk out.